It was a rare occurrence for Mark Carney, the new politician spending part of the morning here in London reflecting on the political strategy he took to win the election.
Channel Prime Minister Mark Carney getting ready to head to Europe today. His Prime Minister will be in the United Kingdom for more trade talks.
Prime Minister Mark Carney continuing his trip to the UK Saturday morning with a stop at Canada House in London.
The United Kingdom is one of our most reliable allies in our shared mission to strengthen prosperity and security on both sides of the Atlantic.
The red carpet was rolled out in London. Bands played, cameras flashed, and Donald Trump walked down the stairway of Air Force One with the confidence of a man who believed the world was watching his every move. It was a show. Every gesture, every wave, every handshake was designed for spectacle. Trump has always thrived on this kind of stage, where politics looks more like theater, where strength is projected in optics as much as in substance. The London visit had all the trappings of presidential grandeur. Union Jacks fluttered beside American flags, trumpets announced the arrival of the American president, and every soundbite was delivered with the intent to dominate headlines. Trump called allies partners, but with an edge of threat. He spoke of deals and victories. He promised that America would never again be mocked or taken advantage of. The whole performance was meant to signal toughness, to show that tariffs and hard lines were tools of dominance, not desperation. But at the very same moment, away from the cameras and the gilded halls, another story was playing out. Mark Carney, a Canadian statesman with the measured calm of a banker rather than the bluster of a showman, was quietly making the rounds in Europe. His meetings did not come with fanfare or red carpets. They came with policy papers, closed-door briefings, and steady conversations. Where Trump relied on the punch of rhetoric, Carney relied on the weight of credibility. Where Trump thrived on noise, Carney's power came from silence and substance. That contrast is the hook of this story. On one side, theater. On the other, policy. And the consequences of that contrast are far bigger than a few headlines. They reach into trade deals, into supply chains, into jobs, into the very alliances that underpin Western economies. This is not just about personality. It is about how personality shapes policy, and how policy shapes the lives of ordinary people. Trump's tariffs were never just numbers on a page. They were political tools, used to project strength and control. But tariffs have ripple effects. And in the back and forth of exemptions, retaliations, and closures, what started as theater became something far more damaging. Before we go deeper, let me pause here. If you're watching this and you want to stay ahead of the curve, to go beyond the sound bites and into the actual consequences that shape politics and economics, subscribe to Traveling Vibes. This is where we take apart the headlines and put them back together with context. And context is everything. Now, back to the tariffs. When Trump announced his sweeping duties, he framed them as protection. Heavy trucks, furniture, pharmaceuticals, metals, all were hit with new tariffs. The language was always the same. America first, America strong, America will no longer be cheated. The orders were signed in front of cameras, the Sharpie strokes bold, the stacks of paper displayed like trophies. But as soon as the headlines faded, the messy reality set in. Tariffs do not exist in a vacuum. Other countries respond. And they did, fast. Canada targeted American whiskey and farm goods. Europe went after Harley-Davidson motorcycles and bourbon. China struck back at soybeans and agriculture. Suddenly, the very industries Trump claimed to protect were the ones calling Washington, pleading for relief. Exemptions began piling up. Hundreds of them. Essential pharmaceuticals were carved out. Critical minerals were spared. Key electronics slipped through. The story Trump told was one of toughness, but the story inside Washington was one of retreat. Every exemption was an admission. America could not function without imports. Every carve-out exposed a vulnerability. And in this mess of tariffs and counter-tariffs, the fallout began to land on real people. Take Crown Royal, a Canadian whiskey brand with deep roots and an iconic global reputation. When Diageo, its parent company, announced the closure of its Ontario bottling facility, the reasoning pointed back to costs, supply chain disruptions, and the pressures created by shifting trade rules. Jobs were lost. Workers stood outside locked gates, stunned, while politicians scrambled to assign blame. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford stepped up with the familiar promise that local jobs must come first. But the damage was already done. This closure became more than a business decision. It became a symbol. A reminder that tariffs are not abstract policy instruments. They cut into communities. They force plant closures. They raise consumer prices. They hurt the very workers they claim to defend. And while Trump raged on podiums about being tough on allies and enemies alike, Carney was in Europe, building the opposite image. He was calm. He was methodical. He was talking about minerals, energy, defense, and finance. In the UK, he pitched Canada as a reliable partner in uncertain times. He wasn't promising to punish. He was offering to provide. His arguments were built not on slogans, but on trust and stability. And Europe listened. That is the most important contrast of all. Trump's approach was loud, immediate, short-term. Carney's was quiet, subtle, long-term. Trump's strategy was to demand, to threaten, to punish. Carney's was to present, to negotiate, to align. In the short term, Trump's approach generated headlines and applause from certain audiences. But in the long term, it eroded trust and drove allies to look elsewhere. Trade is not about noise. It is about networks. It is about reliability. And in the competition between theater and strategy, strategy eventually wins. The mechanics of tariffs are complex, but their consequences are simple. Consumers pay more. Workers lose jobs. Businesses cut costs or close plants. Allies feel betrayed. Rivals find leverage. America tried to coerce, but what it produced was blowback. And while America was busy managing exemptions and explaining away damage, Canada was diversifying. Carney's meetings were not just symbolic. They were about reorienting supply chains, building trade ties with the UK, Germany, and Asia, and deepening partnerships in energy and defense. This was not noise. It was positioning. Canada was telling the world, if America is unpredictable, we can be the reliable alternative. This is the story of Trump raging while Carney strategized. It is the story of how political theater in Washington pushed Canada to pivot. It is about how tariffs, meant to showcase strength, ended up revealing weakness. And this is just the beginning. Because as we move forward in this investigation, we'll dive deeper into the actual executive orders, the specific industries hit hardest, and the geopolitical shifts that followed. We'll trace the ripple effects from Ontario to Detroit, from Brussels to Seoul. And we'll see how one man's reliance on theater created the space for another's reliance on policy. That is the collision we are watching unfold. The tariff machine in Washington never stopped grinding. After the spectacle of big announcements came the steady rhythm of executive orders, press releases, and policy memos. Each one carried the same headline: America first, tough on imports, tariffs as leverage. On paper, it looked like a master plan. Trucks, furniture, pharmaceuticals, metals, nothing was off the table. The message was clear. If you want access to America's market, you pay a price. But when you dig into the details, the story changes. Tariffs sound simple in a speech, but in practice, they're messy. For example, heavy trucks, targeted as a way to boost domestic manufacturing. The problem? American automakers source parts globally. Tariffs on imported steel and aluminum flowed directly into the cost of production. Instead of reviving jobs, they squeezed profit margins. Automakers were forced to make a choice: raise prices on consumers or cut back production. Neither option looked like a win. Pharmaceuticals were another target. Announcing tariffs on drugs makes for good politics. No president wants to look soft on foreign suppliers. But reality is different. The US depends heavily on imported active pharmaceutical ingredients, many from China and India. Within weeks, exemptions were quietly granted. The rhetoric stayed the same, but the practice shifted. America could not afford to cripple its own health system. Furniture was a similar story. On the surface, slapping duties on imports promised a revival of American manufacturing. But the furniture industry had long since globalized. Factories in North Carolina had been shuttered for years, replaced by supply chains stretching across Asia. Tariffs did not bring those factories back. Instead, they simply raised prices for American families shopping at Walmart or Target. Every exemption became an admission. Every retreat was a sign that the rhetoric was outpacing reality. And the world was watching. Canada, more than most, felt the impact. The retaliatory tariffs hit symbolic products: American whiskey, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, farm goods. This was not just about economics. It was about making a point. If Washington wanted to play hardball, its allies could play too. The Crown Royal bottling closure in Ontario showed how these battles spilled into daily life. Diageo, the parent company, calculated the costs and made its move. For the workers in that plant, it wasn't about trade theory, it was about livelihoods. One day they were bottling a product shipped around the world. The next, they were standing outside closed gates. Premier Doug Ford jumped in with fiery words, demanding that Ontario jobs be protected. But his anger could not reopen the plant. It could not erase the fact that tariff battles translate into pink slips. This is where Trump's style of politics clashed with its consequences. Theatrics on stage produced very real pain off stage, and the irony was thick. A president who promised to defend American workers ended up creating ripples that hurt both American and Canadian jobs and pushed allies toward new partnerships. Enter Mark Carney. While Trump framed tariffs as a weapon, Carney framed Canada as a partner. His European tour was not a victory lap, it was a recruitment drive. In the UK, he met with leaders not just to shake hands, but to outline deals. Finance, minerals, energy, trade. He pitched Canada as stable in a time of volatility, predictable in a time of unpredictability. For investors and governments alike, that message landed. And that's the contrast in full view. Trump raged with tariffs, but Carney quietly built alliances. One played to the cameras, the other played to the future. If you want more deep dives like this, don't forget to subscribe to Traveling Vibes, because strategy lasts longer than spectacle.